versus flew in? Mostly from there. Great. Okay, as Jack mentioned, we've gotten to know Terry Takai a number of years back, and she was actually one of the original people that prompted us down this quest of looking at individuals who were pursuing game change and transformation, and ultimately ran into different types of struggles, and we looked for what was a formula to make that a little bit easier. I was curious in terms of the audience today, how many of you today are involved in some type of modernization effort or transformation of some form? Great. Seems about 2/3, a little bit more. And in terms of your role, who might categorize himself as an executive sponsor for that initiative, as opposed to running it day to day? So again, if you're the executive sponsor and you've recruited someone to run it day to day, raise your hand. And if you're running it day to day, raise your hand. Okay, definitely more of the latter. In terms of today, what we're going to talk about and what I'd like to leave you with are a few things. Number one is a different type of model that is contrary to the organizational chart, that can be very effective in terms of achieving those types of goals. Number two is what role you may best be wired to play. And number three, how best to understand the other types of characters that you would like to have around the table in order to pull that off. In terms of our experience in this, we have now seen it rolled out in a variety of applications, both within the private and public sector. Most of our public sector work has been in California across 4 or 5 of the largest agencies. And again, the one thing I would say to put aside in your mind right now, because we really do see it as the challenge in all of this, is the traditional org chart. We've come to find that following a more hierarchical structure for these types of endeavors really becomes one of the biggest challenges. And with that in mind, I would draw the parallel to the military, where they introduced Special Forces and SEAL Team 6 for the most tricky missions. The traditional org structure was too slow, not agile, and ultimately too hierarchical to get those missions done. So as we go through this framework today, we're really talking about an alternative to an org chart. So for business as usual, org chart makes sense. For this type of situation, we're gonna talk about something a little bit different. This represents the hierarchy of the framework that we're talking about, and I'm going to walk through a few of these things. Foundational to this model has to do with the leadership. And here, using the Hollywood analogy, we are looking at the concept of a shared leadership between what we call a producer and a director. The hyper represents the high-impact performer, and the director is the person running the show day to day, where the producer is going to be more your executive sponsor, providing general direction. How many of you here have been involved in a project in any capacity where it did not have appropriate air cover? And anyone right now struggling with this very issue, that because it doesn't have the support from the top, it's really causing issues. Yeah. What we have found is that, similar to the movie The Darkest Hour with Winston Churchill and King George VI, the relationship between the executive sponsor and the director is completely and utterly critical for a transformation. In fact, the person running, I was just speaking yesterday with the CIO we work closely with, and he went as far as saying that if he did not have an executive sponsor that tapped him on the shoulder and really explained why this is so important, and really recruit him away from his current thing as being so much more important than that, he wouldn't even take it on. So the director in this case is the person who's tasked with recruiting the team, managing the team, driving it day to day. But this producer, like in the movie The Darkest Hour with Winston Churchill, even the director is going to have points of time where they lose faith. They have issues, they have doubts. If they don't have a type of weekly meeting with that executive sponsor providing that airtime, and can be a good sounding board, it runs into a lot of issues. And ultimately, without the director producer, the rest of this whole thing fails. And that's a little bit on the logic on this thing that we've now seen over and over again. Usually you start trying to build a team and a goal without the executive sponsor and that director and that relationship, real struggle. I'm going to talk more about that shortly. The second piece is the quest. Going back to the hero's journey motto, the tap on the shoulder to the director and ultimately to the team about a worthy quest. Why are we doing this? What is the mission at hand? Really important to define carefully up front. We have gone into a number of large state projects that have derailed. They include system integrators, and when we interview the system integrators and internal, we very rarely hear people talk about what the actual reason they're doing this for is. There's a massive modernization project in California. We were just with one of the executive sponsors the other day. They said, I don't see why we should modernize it. The systems have not been crashing. Everything's working fine. What's the reason? Now you speak to the director, they say, well, it's going to crash in a few years. But the storyline of why it's happening has to be defined. And that quest is something that the director and producer together should really be able to develop. Okay? Finally, the team dynamic. Okay? And the first two pieces we see is at least 50% of the success formula. Bringing together a diverse set of minds. Diverse teams are the best, diverse teams are actually the worst as well. So how is it that we recruit a group of different types of minds, but get them to understand the different decision styles? Okay, some people on the team are going to be more data-driven and others are more action-oriented. How do people understand what role they each play and become a go-to for? And finally, what we call the cast of characters. And that is who is not on the team, yet could make or break the success. And the terms we use here are both the enablers and the blockers. So what we suggest is you start with a group of stakeholders, and based on those stakeholders, start to figure out who really is interested. In a large pension fund we worked with, a CIO had buy-in across the board. We met the CFO, and the CFO made that very common comment, which is, it's just a black box over in IT. We don't know where the money is going. We don't understand what's happening. And ultimately, the CIO developed a relationship with the CFO and even asked her if she could be one of the cast members, specifically the dollars and cents person, and made that person part of the journey. And that is what this thing is about. How do we create a worthy cause and recruit the necessary people to accomplish this mission? It does not work like a traditional org chart, and that is why it is important to be able to get this initiative off of the traditional org chart. So that's long. I want to spend a little bit more time on this hyper director that we're talking about. It's completely foundational to it. The hyper director is the person that, again, is managing the team day to day. And in terms of this role, probably all of you have played this role at some point in time. The question to really ask yourself is, does this energize you? Does this energize you? Because you have the option in almost any role to bring somebody in underneath you to actually do the day-to-day managing. In terms of the hyper director, just borrowing from maybe the football analogy for a moment, this would be your head coach. This would be the person recruiting the team, and this would be the person defining the actual mission at hand. Their sense of urgency tends to propel real game change to occur. They have a drive and an energy that on one hand will bring people together, but on the other hand can piss a lot of people off. Jack talked about my fascination with a lot of these leaders who did disappear. They either resigned, they were fired, they grew disenchanted, and most of the time it's because they did not have, the necessary support around them. But they did not recruit the right producer and the right team. In terms of this head coach type, stimulated to make things happen, and they tend to be pretty creative, analytic thinkers. Going back to the analogy of a project team, you may, as an executive sponsor, have one from the system integrator, you may have one internal in the organization, but you really need this hyper directorship to be very much about getting things done and good with being able to manage meetings day to day. A lot of people try to play this role even though it does not energize them. We're introducing this to try to make some simple language here to be able to recruit someone that can play this role. Now, as we studied this individual, we went out and assessed about 100 of them, okay, using an assessment tool, which, if you're interested in learning more about, I'll share some information on with you after the session. What's interesting about the hyper director, and again, this person is so make or break for the quest, is when we looked at their motivational pattern, that horizontal line right there represents a typical executive. So a benchmark set of 12,000 executives across the board. When we looked at the hyper director, what we were able to see is their motivations differ quite a bit on two things. Number one, their linear, which was motivation around upward movement, was lower. In fact, when you ask them about their career interests and aspirations, rarely did they talk about power, money, or title. Okay, those things might be a means to an end. They were not the end in and of itself. Rather, they talked about adventure, novelty, and newness. They talked about doing things unrelated. Oftentimes their hobbies were completely unrelated to their work. They also seem to have really, really messy resumes, like really messy. So executive search folks don't even pick up on these people usually, because search folks are looking for people that have steady progression. But this would be an example, as an example of somebody like a Arnold Schwarzenegger, just thinking of the Terry Takai example, doing politics, doing movies, doing businesses, doing completely unrelated stuff. And that was sort of the hallmark of the motivational profile of the hyper, and why oftentimes they would take smaller roles but of higher impact in different areas. So this is just some data to keep in mind when you're actually trying to identify this person to run your initiative. The second piece of data that we use to identify the hyper leader is around their decision-making style. If you think about an average day, we're making hundreds of decisions, big decisions, small decisions, especially for running a project. This is really important. The interpersonal style, which is represented in the blue bar of our insight tool, represents how the hyper director tends to carry themselves when they're interacting with other individuals. Pretty balanced. Okay, the decisive, flexible, hierarchical, integrative are just different ways to interact with people. Some are more serious, some are open, but they tend to have a pretty wide range of personality traits, pretty adaptable. When you get into how they make decisions, though, which are the red bars, the part that is not as obvious to see, is they tend to be very data-driven, very creative, analytic. They can take in a lot of data points from a lot of different angles. I'll give you an example. The hard drive company Western Digital, who we've done a lot of work with, in their case, they ran into an issue about 8-9 years ago where the Thai floods occurred and wiped out their factories in Thailand. About 45,000 factory workers out of a job. Immediately. CEO calls Wall Street, says we may have to shut the company down. We can't even get our supplies or anything. They put somebody in this mission to try to fix the Thailand facilities who had no experience in anything to do with floods. But this individual very quickly had the type of thinking pattern to be able to go out and bring together data points from different people. He brought in the Navy SEALs equivalent in Thailand. He brought in all different types of minds and had multiple daily meetings with them. So the ability to bring data in from different angles, and the adventure seeker this guy is, made this energizing. In fact, he said when he would go to bed at night after a 12-hour day dealing with these floods issue, he would just sleep great, wake up the next morning. There was almost no stress. They are thrill seekers. Okay, so this is who you really want directing the production. I'm just going to pause for a moment for any just initial questions on this piece rather than leaving it all to the end. Yes?
I'm trying to understand what's going on here. So you performed a study, is that what we're sort of
Yep.
understanding? And how was it conducted? How many people were part of the same thing?
Thank you for that. So this part here is the study. So we had about 100 of these hyper directors go through an assessment. And we were trying to figure out what actually made them different. How are they different than just a typical executive? And what we came to find is that from a motivational standpoint, what energized them was much more about adventure, novelty, newness, moving around to different types of roles, as opposed to upward movement. So title was less important to them. And the reason this is so key is in recruiting them, whether it's a recruiting firm or you're doing it internally, rather than looking for somebody who's just risen the ranks and all, you may want to look for somebody that's actually gone around to different things unrelated to one another. And this person also may not raise their hand for the role. See, since they're not motivated as much about the power or the position or the title, they may not be seeking it out. So these people are under the radar. They're not obvious. They're not obvious. They tend to be under-political. And again, the study was done based on finding 100 people or so that had completed this successful transformations before and comparing them to a typical executive. Then when we started to look at a little bit about how they actually operate with one another, they're pretty adaptable interpersonal styles. The key on their thinking style was very data-driven. That integrative and hierarchic is they take a lot of data in from different angles before making a decision, as opposed to just making a gut instinct up front and driving it. They actually, using our language, are not as decisive. They can make decisions quickly, they do, but they do get a lot of data. Really appreciate that clarified question. Anything else up until now, particularly about this director position? Great. Okay, so as we talk about with this director, they zero in on the key objectives, formulate the plan, assemble and lead a team of diverse thinkers, manage the logistics, and ultimately get into the details and get this job done. The reason we highlighted the team of diverse thinkers is I would like to talk about this for a couple minutes. I mentioned earlier the best teams are diverse, the worst teams are diverse. The difference is how that diversity is understood. It is essential for this director to have the curiosity to understand how each person is wired in the team and to help each team member understand one another. So often I hear leaders say, these are adults, these are managers underneath me. They make a lot of money. I as their boss don't need to, do conflict resolution. Two people on the team, the head of applications, head of infrastructure, they see things differently. They should figure it out themselves. The reality is that the hyper director is very good at sitting down and helping them appreciate their differences in thought and why those differences in thought are needed. So we call that the go-to, and making sure that each person on that team has real clear understanding of their unique contribution is very much what we are counting on this director role to be able to do. This director does not come without risk. As Jack mentioned earlier, in the beginning of our class, we were seeing these individuals were derailing. Much more often than not, they fail. And they need support. They need support. Even in the movie The Darkest Hour, Winston Churchill, as you may recall, was about to quit. And he was at his house towards the end until the king came in and reaffirmed to Winston how much he believed in Winston and his real potential and how he had his back covered. It is critical that the director has that type of air cover. They also are going to get frustrated and, along the way, and the team needs to understand a little bit about their sense of urgency and why they're moving so quickly. And finally, these are just some other quotes you can see up here from different people that we've seen have some of these qualities and some of the challenges they run into. So far, I've talked a lot about this director. And the reason I talk about the director, it is essential to look in the mirror and ask yourself, is this you? Is this what energizes you? And if you're not in a role right now that doesn't have, that you're not doing that, try to seek that out. But if you find yourself that you would rather actually enable that hyper director, anyone in a CIO role, you should probably have a few different hyper directors running different initiatives. I'd like to introduce this other position that we talked about called the producer. And the producer is a different profile. When we spoke to the hyper directors about the type of air cover they found to be most helpful, these were the traits that we consistently heard about. They had somebody above them that had a macro view. They had a big picture. They could see different angles, different approaches. They had someone above them that was politically savvy, that could deal with budget issues, etc., and provided that air cover that we've discussed. And finally, the producer oftentimes is the one that defines the quest. They define the quest, and similar to Hollywood, they may define where they want to go with it, and then the director gets into the actual details of operationalizing it. So, one of the challenges is, do we graduate from director to producer? Sometimes people ask that. We actually find that this tends to be pretty deep in our motivational makeup. And we tend to be excellent, or have the ability to be excellent at one of these, but these two are wired very differently. So that's the idea there. Questions on this producer stuff?
How do you identify the director, how do you identify the producer from the wealth of people that are producing at above average or above expected things, so that you can apply this survey tool to them?
What's the definition of producer exactly?
Yeah, so the producer is going to be the other half of this leadership piece, and that's going to be the individual who effectively has ownership of the project.
I was meaning more, you said, okay, we used a baseline of 12,000 people for that other slide, and I'm sure you had, a baseline.
Yeah.
How do you identify who you're going to apply that tool to? Because in my organization, I have a wealth of people that do extraordinary work day in and day out, but I have two extraordinary producers. How do you determine across the board, when you look at the industry, who you're going to apply that tool to?
On the director one, that was looking at accomplishment and achievement. On the producer one, to your point, we went right to the directors and asked them. We asked them, what do you need? What worked? What didn't? Where did you have air cover that worked? Where didn't it? Ultimately, these are the character traits that continue to come up. We did invite about 30 or so producers to go through the assessment over the last couple of years. There's a couple trends we found on that, so we can look at some of the data on the producer and what made them a bit different. But most of what led us to the producer was the director and how they described that. Yeah. And, it's tricky, in state government, there's an argument that says, it really is just the governor in the end. For any major project, you can go sort of all the way up. We were speaking to a client in healthcare services recently, and it's very interesting because the director immediately said, I'm directing this production, and that's how I'm wired. And she goes, I'm sort of producerless. I don't really have the air cover. So we met her stakeholders. So sometimes it could be the boss, it could be someone else. We did meet the stakeholders. We met the boss who absolutely had these qualities. In fact, the boss's name came up multiple times from other people in the state as someone that's really wired for this. And when we shared the model of the boss, she liked the concept, but she didn't understand that that was what her direct report needed. So she was not playing to this role. And this gets back to the Hollywood analogy, that again, a lot of us may be wired in this way, but we're not inserting ourselves in this role. Again, from the director's standpoint, managing those meetings, enabling diversity of thought, critical. Don't let the team figure it out on their own. The director has to enable them. And then on this producer side, recognize that the producer should proactively suggest weekly meetings with the director. Director should bring meeting issues to them in the meeting, and the role that they play as well. A lot of people are hands off, and they're just expecting these productions to happen on their own. Does that help answer?
Yeah, I was just curious because, you know, how your selection criteria for who you apply the tool to.
Yep.
If you're looking for certain people, then your tool's going to satisfy that. I didn't know how you came to those selections, but
yeah, no, it's a great point. We were definitely biased on the director one, just to find people that had successfully achieved transformations. But on the producer one, that was where we sort of did more of a search, where we said to these directors, who do you think are exemplars? And then we started interviewing and assessed. Fewer of the producers. Producer knowledge is continuing to evolve. Yeah. Yeah.
By politically savvy, could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah.
Do you mean like kind of breaking out the side of like you can give a director like power, right? But there's other people with power, right? In a lot of different areas, there are other powerful people that have the information or have the resources that you want to conduct the project. Is that what you mean by politically savvy? Not going to break down.
Great. Let me tap that in, and let's discuss more afterwards if I don't fully answer this. Which is, on the politically savvy, they're going to have a pretty good sense of where there's support and where there's people that could get in the way of the project not being successful. And they're going to help build those bridges. There was another example of a very high-profile state CIO, had all the support in the world from the governor. It was a cabinet-level position, drove the agenda, but there was a peer of that individual in finance, again a finance example, where they did not support that individual. The politically savvy in that case would have been winning the mind and heart of that CFO earlier on. The problem is the director is moving so quickly and has such a sense of urgency that oftentimes these blind spots, they kill the director. And yeah, the director can try to focus on it, but they're not as motivated by that stuff. The interpersonal piece is not what energizes them as much as getting the job done. That's why we really see this as a shared dynamic duo relationship of director-producer. And the producer really can help with those eyes and ears. Thank you. So with the producer, as we just discussed, they're about helping to secure the funding. Oftentimes, they're the one defining a worthy quest up front. They provide the director with the air cover and they help navigate the stakeholder relationships. Now again, if you're a director, you're a producerless, and you have to go recruit someone. You're going to your boss and you believe they're that type and you ask them, I need help in these areas. That's sort of the purpose of this exercise, is oftentimes all these stars aren't going to align on their own. And somebody has to act as the catalyst to kick it off. Sometimes the director has gone through this process and identified that person and involved them, similar to the healthcare example. More often than not, however, the producer is the starting point. They are the executive sponsor, they secure the funding. And what's important in this case, if you are the producer, is you define this quest in a very inspiring way. Because that director is not going to be easy to hire. Wow, we have a semiconductor client right now who massive new semiconductor bringing to market, and they have found that they would like a new director. Okay, so the producer in this case wants a new director for the role. Some people are moving around. They just need someone new in this role. And so they went to somebody else in the organization, and tapped them on the shoulder. The producer said, this is extremely important. We'd love you to take this. And they said, thank you very much. However, I enjoy the project I'm on right now. and the problem is, while that producer can force them to take the role, they can't force them to be energized by it. So it's very, very important that the producer thinks about how to make this compelling for the director, making it a mission worthwhile. Keep in mind, going back to the profile of the director, what's going to get that director energized, what's going to get the right director energized, is not the title. Not the title, not necessarily the power, but the ability to achieve something really real, really inspiring, really big. And it's exciting, there's adventure along the way, etc. It's interesting, the company Charles Schwab, back when it was about 100 people or so, Chuck Schwab was sitting there as the producer, classic producer. He had his idea and vision to democratize investing. But as he has publicly said, he had no ability to manage a team. Learning disabilities, challenged, etc., not interested in it. So he recruited this guy named Dave Pottruck, who was middle manager at some company in New York, kind of bored, tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Do you want to help democratize investing?" And he inspired him in a type of way where he got up and came. He was now on a mission. Directors want missions. They don't want a job. And that's why they tend to move around to different things. So that's a little bit about this importance of the quest and the definition of it. And in general, more often than not, it will be the producer who is defining that. What's interesting about this is this was a note we recently got from a leader in procurement in government. And what's fascinating is just how he described this concept of the director and producer oftentimes being the same person. I mean, how many of us, based on everything we've just gone through, feel that we're actually playing both roles? On one hand, we're setting the direction, again, the financing, but we're also managing the team. How many of us feel we're doing both? So how does it feel, Jack, doing those?
It's hard. Well,
yeah.
it's just
What-
one's more natural than the other.
Which do you like more?
I think the director.
Yeah. I mean, the reality of the situation is, and he uses the analogy of the CIO versus CTO, basic concept right here is that if you're in both roles, you sort of have your foot on the accelerator and the brake at the same time. You know, the director is all about driving forward. The producer is good to sort of spot check and pressure test and kind of provide some other ideas of blind spots. Trying to play both of these roles yourself really creates a lot of unnecessary strain and can really cause these projects to, to be challenged. So ultimately, what we're talking about here is these two individuals coming together early on in a project, or if you're doing a reset of the project, getting this relationship really established nicely. Okay? A mutual understanding, appreciation, valuing of one another, playing off of one another, and really playing to the role that we are more wired to. As we bring some of these points home, number one, is the quest worth pursuing? That is, in any of these big projects, got to really challenge it up front. Does this make sense with the new governor in Florida? Where does this fit into the governor's priority? Is the air cover there? Does the agency have the support? Is this thing going to work? Does it have a good story to it? Those are some examples of ways of pressure testing, the worthiness of the quest. Number two, the role you play. If you're interested in trying to figure out which side you're on, more director or producer, we have arranged to make a 20-minute insight tool available to everyone today. Our contact information will be up here afterwards. This is really important. You can use the tool. You can also just ask people on your team or others, where have you been most energized? You can ask your spouse or significant other, when am I happiest? When am I most energized? Again, we have seen people make much more deliberate decisions on which role they're going to play. Not only the effectiveness goes up, their overall well-being goes up. Okay? And finally, how are you ensuring maximum diversity of thought on the team? And understanding what each person on the team is a go-to for. And that they understand that that is what they're well suited for. Some examples of go-tos. The creative analytic thinker, the person who's good at brainstorming new possibilities. Another one might be a sparring partner. Okay? We had someone on one of the teams that was known as the cynic, always the naysayer. What the director helped get the team to understand is this is the person to go to when you want to pressure test your logic before you have a presentation to stakeholders. And now this individual sort of sat back. He was no longer naysaying because people came to him when he had a challenge, when they had a challenge. Your business as usual individual. Listen, 80% of your people are trying to keep the things moving along as you're transforming. They're important. Let them understand their role in maintaining current operational excellence. Ultimately, though, it's the leader's job in these weekly meetings to facilitate the dialogue and help enable healthy debate amongst each other so new thoughts come out. But don't assume the team is going to self-manage. You're going to find most people around the table going to be quiet. It's critical the director calls on the different people, really engages the different types. That's why the personality type of that director is so important. Actually, so in terms of questions, rather than I'm going to ask a couple of sort of specific ones. I am curious, who here has a project right now underway that is, let's say, a budget of $50 million or more? I see a sort of back there. Who's at Quest? Who's at the Quest forming stage right now? Trying to define with the new governor, change administration, the quests that matter most. Okay. General questions about any of this? Yeah.
I think this is really good stuff. I mean, I see a lot of pertinent information, but one question that bothers me a little bit is in government, I see a lot more producerless directors. And what are the mechanisms you can use when you have either sense of that, either a producer that has no director or a director that has no producer? How do you get the importance of having those two components and characteristics together? And then you used a word that was interesting, is the catalyst. What is the catalyst that brings these two people together? In other words, even Churchill and George, they didn't hit it off initially, but there was something that brought them together, and that was a catalyst of sorts. So.
Yeah. Now, certainly on the catalyst front, there's nothing like a crisis. And I think going back to Western Digital and the Thai floods, what's so interesting about that example is, as we look at the team dynamic of the 4 or 5 key leaders that had to work together, cross-functionally there, they didn't collaborate very well originally. It wasn't until this crisis came about. So I do think one of the things, when the producer defines the quest, or if the director finds himself in the middle of it, is it's that urgency piece. I mean, how do you get the why now, and or even manufacture a crisis if you can in some way, shape, or form? Oftentimes that's the catalyst that gets the attention. Some type of urgency driver, some scarce resource. That's going to help with that. To your first question on producerless, just so I'm clear on that, is that if we find ourselves as a director of something and we just don't have that air cover or that support, that's the question? It's tough. I think ultimately, just to sort of fast forward to the end, if the director does not have that air cover, and this is a major transformation, it's a major change, not integration, it's something major, they're really going to struggle, and they're going to probably get disengaged in the end. So anything you can do up front. What I would keep in mind is that example of the healthcare executive, that their boss really was that, did have that profile of producer, but they weren't acting as a producer. And even taking this presentation or this thinking to that leader and saying, I really need your help as a recoverer. I can't do this without you. With Winston Churchill, if he had if he knew what he knew at the end up front, he may have earlier on been able to say to the king, you know, I can't be successful without you. You may recall the king suggested the weekly lunches in that movie. But the director can proactively suggest that. The other thing is that it doesn't have to be your direct boss. You know, it may be somebody in a slightly different area, maybe a skip level up. You have to obviously keep your boss in the loop on that. But you know, the director, hopefully this provides a little more locus of control of identifying who the ideal one would be in being able to approach them and ask. Back.
This is my front row. You mentioned how you recruit a lot of extraordinary talents, and let's talk about the director roles and how they sometimes would, you know, get disenchanted or disappear or resign or get fired or whatever. Was that mainly because they did not have a good producer, or because they tried to do both roles, or they didn't really know what their strength was? How did they really go wrong? What was the main problem?
Yeah, well, for quite some time, what we heard from the director is they were blaming others to some extent. They were saying, my stakeholders wouldn't support me. My direct reports couldn't keep up with me. Or I just got bored. Those were sort of the three most common ones. And the I just got bored is, keep in mind that from a motivational profile, the director is energized by adventure, novelty, and newness. So the moment it becomes business as usual, they literally would just go find another interesting quest. This work over the last 9 years, what the goal has been is to, again, empower the ecosystem for all of us to know what role we play in this. So as we spot these issues, we can help. So if we're the director now, we don't have an excuse, okay? If we don't have an exciting quest, go get some different minds together and help redefine it so it is interesting. You, the director, are moving fast. You got to keep your team along with you. You cannot leave them behind. It's not the team's fault, it's yours. You have to help them understand your mind. You're a creative analytic thinker, you're into adventure, you have a sense of urgency. It's tough to keep up with that. So it's the onus of you. And finally, you go recruit the producer if that producer has not just shown up. Tell them, I need your help. You know, no different than a board of directors. In the private sector, the CEO saying, I need my own sounding board, I can't do this alone. So we didn't like the inefficiency, Jack, of all this great talent that was not actualized. Yeah, if you look at sports leagues, it's all organized. You have the owner, you have the head coach, it's all franchised, it's all organized by role. Same thing with Hollywood. Using the Hollywood analogy, you have the director, the producer, the star. Those two things are talent-based. They're organized by talent. The problem with the org structure is the org structure is designed for consistency, reliability, and that's really important for a lot of stuff. But today we're just talking about a transformation, and that's where we felt this model really, really accelerated things.
Interesting. Good. Thank you.
We have time for
Yeah, we
one more question?
yeah. Let's take another 5-6 minutes.
Great.
7.
Fire away.
Anybody want to?
Yes.
So, considering a traditional org chart and a hierarchical nature, how would you say that these two roles, the producer and the director, is there an effectiveness or an efficiency gain, considering which is the superior and which is the subordinate? In your research, have you seen that to be more efficient if the producer is above versus the director?
Got it. I'm sorry, do you mean from a reporting structure?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm going to answer this possibly in a slightly different way, but please tell me if I'm not answering this. One thing I did not mention that this prompted is the director-producer is actually non-hierarchical. In other words, a lot of you might be thinking, well, the governor is a producer, CIO is a director. CIO is a producer, head of applications is the director. Okay. First of all, forget about the org chart, as I mentioned. We're talking about a special mission, SEAL Team 6, we're on a mission to get something done. And those two roles, the producer is going to be more politically driven, great interpersonal skills, very long-range thinking, where the director is going to be day-to-day driving that team, managing it, etc. They could be peers, or you could even have a producer reporting to the director. In the case of Facebook, okay, it's recently come up with a little bit of our collaboration, is that Zuckerberg is the director, Sheryl Sandberg is the producer. She's more out there, promoting things, doing a lot of the politicking, interpersonal stuff, and he's sort of in the trenches day-to-day managing a core group. At least, again, forget about the company overall, for their most important mission right now, like security, that type of stuff, data breaches. You take a look at the actual mission, it's sort of interesting. The key is to make sure you don't look for the superhero that can just do everything. We do find those two individuals together, you kind of get a 1 + 1 = 100 type of synergy. Great. I'm very curious. I'm curious about what we see as kind of the next big state project in Florida, and whether you're directly on it or you see it from a distance. Any thoughts you have about how that gets defined as a worthy quest, or even risk factors around being able to define it? What is the big one?
All problem.
Okay. Can you just elaborate a little bit where it's at?
I know nothing about it.
Yeah. Who does? Yeah. The state accounting system. Who here does that affect in some way, shape, or form? Wow. Yeah, that was probably the first question I should have asked.
Way above 50 million, I would imagine.
Okay.
It's about 280 million.
Yeah, I don't know.
Sounds similar to Fiscal in California, potentially. Okay. I think this is really just a good example to sort of lead with, is that, Fiscal has gone through 4 or 5 directors in California right now, doesn't appear to have air cover from anyone, and is well over budget. And I think this isn't, you're all stakeholders, it sounds like, in some way, shape, or form. Challenge the thinking of it, based on where it's at. You really make sure, does it have, is the person actually empowered to run it, have some of these qualities that we've talked about? And do you see that person having the air cover above them? And if you see misalignment just on the leadership piece, that's the part that you can have the biggest impact as a stakeholder on, providing some input on that up front. And it can come from a number of different ways. But this stuff is not, it's tricky because it doesn't, to get this funding, it just comes from all different places. It's not as always as black and white, just one person starting.
I'm not so certain that a director type, as you describe it, could actually exist in government. I mean, I really don't buy that. Because part of a lot of the things that you described are crises that occur, and someone's brought in, and from my perspective, I would imagine to accomplish things where there is, the impact of failure is, there's no longer a business after you fail. The person who, as you described, one of their characteristics is they're willing to take risks. That's part of their makeup.
Yeah.
So I think in those situations where failure is ultimate, the company's going to go out of business, there is no single risk that you could encounter in trying to achieve the goal that is larger than that ultimate risk of failure.
Yeah.
So the reality of it is that in our environment, we aren't allowed to at all abandon risk because there are so many different entities that inspect us for risk and various other things that you can't have somebody that has that attitude of either somewhat or totally abandoning risk to accomplish a goal. And I think that's why people are successful, as you described it. I mean, especially like a SEAL team. They do manage risk somewhat, but their risk is loss of life, failure of the mission. They they have to abandon certain risks that you would normally encounter. I don't really see how that could exist in government where you can pretty much abandon risk to accomplish goals. And maybe I'm.
Well, let him answer though. We're almost out of time.
Great.
Yeah. Do you have to have an answer for that one?
Oh, yeah, I think, well, just somewhat unrelated, I know what's interesting to me is I think the big question is, David, why are you talking about this in terms of government? You know, things are, this is about managing risk here, it's a little bit more steady, et cetera. I'm shocked about how, after CalPERS started using this, how many agencies in California started bringing this in. And what was interesting to me is that these hypers were just as common, frankly, within government as private sector. There were adrenaline junkies or people that really enjoyed venture, making things happen. And frankly, similar to entrepreneurs, a lot of people think entrepreneurs are risk seekers. They're actually oftentimes looking to mitigate risk by controlling their own destiny. So I think you're really looking for a profile that's not looking to bring risk in, but looking to take something like the finance project and say, how do we de-risk this? They're driven not by so much risk, but more by making a meaningful mission happen. So, happy to talk more afterwards.
I agree. I think these characteristics fit any role, but in its own way. Yeah, like you said about maybe you're not seeking risks. That's not really what a director does.
Yeah, because they're looking for adventure, they're looking for something exciting and meaningful, but the risk they don't have as much fear around the risk. But they're not just looking for risk, they're looking to make a huge accomplishment.
Yes, we do accept risk in certain instances.
Well, David, if people want to know more about this, I know I do, because you kind of whetted our appetite for some of this.
Because you're my director and producer right now.
But I am fortunate to have an excellent producer role now as a boss now. So that's really, and it's really helpful.
Yeah,
it's amazing. So I really learned a lot
Yeah,
myself.
so
How can I find out more?
yeah, feel free to send an email. My colleague Sarah up here as well. Come on up. And we are happy to extend the career review insight tool that does look at your motivational tendency. Either just send us an email or QR code or come on up. Very nice to see you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, David. Thank you.